Hey there, deep divers. Are you ready for another deep dive?
Always. I love these deep dives.
Me too. Today's deep dive is going to be a little philosophical. We are going to be looking at a Reddit thread
Ooh,
from Deep Thought.
I like it already.
This one really got people going. It all started with this statement from red-bearded FCKR. They said, if you are capable of violence, you aren't peaceful, you're just harmless.
Okay, so right off the bat, we're getting some really big concepts here.
Right, and we're going to be looking at all the comments in the thread and sort of dissecting the ideas
I love it.
and exploring all the different perspectives and how people kind of define these terms, like peaceful, harmless, even violence itself.
Yeah, because violence, it's not always, a fist fight. It's not always physical.
Right, and in fact, one of the commenters, Albert Snow, brought that up. They said emotional and psychological harm are forms of violence too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then Oh Boy took it even further and mentioned property crime.
Oh, interesting.
So many shades of harm, right?
Yeah,
Even before we even get to this whole peace versus harmlessness debate.
right.
So there did seem to be this real division in the comment section about whether peace is like an active choice or simply a state of being.
Mm-hmm.
So you had a lot of people, echoing red-bearded FCKR's view.
Right.
Like, for example, No Camp 9628. They brought up the Black Panthers' philosophy of self-defense.
Mm-hmm.
And they were basically saying, hey, if you can't fight back, are you really choosing peace? Or are you just vulnerable? That's
Right.
an interesting point, right?
It is, yeah.
Then you had Dark Tabs, Ether. They made this really clever analogy to choosing not to cheat in a relationship.
Oh,
So they were saying, like, the choice to remain faithful is what makes someone truly loyal.
okay.
So I guess applying that to peace, are they saying it's the conscious decision to not be violent that makes someone truly peaceful?
It seems so, yeah.
Okay. But then you also had people pushing back against this whole active choice thing,
Right.
like latent tries. They were arguing that often societal constraints and fear of consequences make choosing violence like impossible,
Yeah,
even if someone wanted to.
right.
So it brings in this whole other level of like, individual agency versus societal pressures.
Exactly.
Is it really a free choice if you're terrified of the repercussions?
Right.
And then you had Paradox Cabby, who shared a personal anecdote about being bullied
Oh, wow.
and just being unable to fight back, even though they were physically capable. They described it as this like mental block, this inability to be aggressive.
That's so interesting how, even if you're physically capable, there's the psychological element as well.
Right.
This mental component to it.
Absolutely. So yeah, already getting pretty complex,
Yeah.
this whole idea of peace as a choice. And then the thread took kind of another turn. People started questioning whether everyone is truly capable of violence.
Oh, interesting. Right. Like, are we all just one bad day away from, snapping?
Yeah, it's a scary thought, right?
Yeah.
But then you had Druid Wonder, who had kind of a more nuanced take, and they talked about varying levels of willingness to engage in violence,
Okay.
even if the capacity is there,
Right.
and then how, different roles that people play within societies might influence that.
Right.
Like they brought up this like warrior class almost,
Mm-hmm.
where you have certain individuals who are like, trained and prepared for violence,
Right.
and then others who aren't.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so we've gone from like, defining violence to debating the nature of choice to like considering whether everyone has that potential within them.
Yeah.
And then things took a really interesting turn when Wizard X3 brought up the power of ideas.
Ooh,
So
interesting.
they were pointing to figures like Gandhi, Mother Teresa, Einstein,
Okay.
and their argument was, hey, violence isn't always physical.
Yeah.
Ideas themselves, can be really powerful forces for harm.
Absolutely. Like, words can hurt,
Right.
Like spreading harmful ideologies or hate speech.
And it's like that whole thing that Druid Wonder mentioned earlier about indirect violence.
Right.
They use the example of poisoning as like historically a feminine method of murder, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
But it just shows how violence can be like subtle,
Mm-hmm.
even hidden.
Right. It's not always this in-your-face physical altercation.
So does that mean that even someone who's physically harmless could still like contribute to violence through their words or beliefs?
Right. It's like it really makes you think about responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Like if our thoughts and words have the power to incite harm, then what responsibility do we have to be mindful of the ideas we're putting out into the world?
It's deep stuff.
It is, yeah.
We've gone from like defining violence to questioning the nature of choice to now like exploring how Even our ideas can be a form of harm.
It's amazing how multifaceted this whole issue is. And it makes you realize that peace isn't just about, like, avoiding fistfights, right? It's about fostering a mindset, a way of being in the world that actively rejects violence in all its forms.
Yeah, and I keep thinking about how this ties back to that tension we were discussing earlier.
Yeah.
That tension between the ideal of peace and then the reality of a world where violence often feels inevitable.
Absolutely. And actually, Entropic Embers brought this up really well. They
Okay.
said peace has a price, and most of us forget or turn a blind eye towards the banal violence required to maintain it.
Wow. Okay, so are they implying that even our most peaceful societies are built on some level of force or coercion?
It definitely makes you think, right? Think about like law enforcement,
Right.
military defense, even just like economic competition.
Mhm.
All these systems, they might be necessary for maintaining order and stability, but they also involve like power, control, sometimes even force.
So are we saying that even in the pursuit of peace, we can't completely escape the shadow of violence?
It's a tough question, and I don't know if there's an easy answer. But maybe like acknowledging this tension is a necessary step towards building a more genuinely peaceful world.
It makes me think about the difference between pacifism and what we might call practical peace.
Oh, interesting.
So like pacifism often implies like complete rejection of violence in all forms,
Mm,
whereas practical peace might acknowledge the need for certain forms of force or intervention, but only as a last resort.
right.
And then that raises the question of like, how do we determine what constitutes a justifiable use of force?
Right. Like, when is violence necessary for self-defense,
Right.
for protecting
Or
others?
even like upholding justice.
Exactly. Yeah.
These are heavy questions. It's amazing that we're seeing them debated so passionately in like the comment section of a Reddit thread.
I know, right? It just shows these dilemmas are still so relevant. They're
Right.
timeless.
And as we're talking about this tension between peace and violence, I can't help but think about forgiveness.
Oh, wow.
Is forgiveness necessary for true peace, both on a personal level and a societal level?
That's a really good question. I mean, can true peace exist without some form of understanding?
Right.
Some, like, bridge being built between those who have been harmed and those who have caused harm?
Right.
It's a powerful question.
It makes you wonder if maybe the path to peace isn't just about reducing violence, but also about increasing our capacity for empathy, understanding, forgiveness.
I love that. It suggests that peace isn't just an absence of something, but like a presence of something positive,
Right.
something that requires effort.
Absolutely. Speaking of effort, let's circle back to that question of whether everyone is truly capable of violence.
Yeah,
So, we talked about the psychological and social factors, but what about, like, biology?
right.
Are we just wired for aggression?
Right, nature versus nurture, right.
Yes.
And, a lot of people pointed to the historical evidence like wars, serial killers.
Right.
Like humans are capable of some pretty dark stuff.
Psychological 1752 even said, literally, look at all the wars, look at serial killers, we are capable of violence.
Right.
And then, the fact that weapons are so easily accessible today makes it even more like a sobering thought.
Yeah,
Like, what is the destructive potential of our species?
it's a little scary.
It is, but at the same time, we see incredible acts of kindness and compassion and self-sacrifice throughout history too, right?
Right.
So is it like this constant battle between our like primal instincts and our higher moral faculties?
Yeah, maybe it's this constant push and pull between good and evil.
Right.
And, the outcome of that battle is shaped by so many things, like our upbringing, our environment, our choices.
And it's not just about individual choices either, right?
Right.
It's like the systems and structures that we create, the way we organize our societies, all of that can either amplify or mitigate that capacity for violence.
Absolutely. Think about the difference between like a culture that glorifies violence and one that prioritizes peace and understanding.
Yeah.
Like the values we instill, the stories we tell, the role models we celebrate, all of these play a role in shaping our understanding of what's acceptable and what's not.
That makes me think about the role of education in promoting peace.
Hmm.
Can we actually teach people to be more peaceful?
It's a great question.
To resolve conflict without resorting to violence.
I think education is a crucial piece of this puzzle.
Yeah.
It can foster empathy,
Mm-hmm.
critical thinking, conflict resolution skills,
Right.
and help us understand the root causes of violence and explore alternative ways of addressing conflict.
So it's not just about, like, acquiring knowledge.
Right.
It's also about cultivating the values and the skills
Absolutely.
necessary for building a more peaceful world.
Exactly. And it's not just formal education. It's
Mhm.
also about, what we learn from our families, our communities, and even the media we consume,
Yeah.
are constantly being influenced. And those influences can either, reinforce or challenge our beliefs about violence.
This whole conversation is making me realize that peace isn't just an absence of violence.
Mm-hmm.
It's like an active process, a state of being
Right.
that we need to cultivate both individually and collectively. Yeah, and it feels like that's what this whole Reddit thread is about. This active pursuit of peace
Right.
within ourselves and in the world around us. And I really liked how Scion773 put it. They said, only a fool who has no future perspectives and doesn't believe in themselves gets into fights.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, choosing violence is a sign of limited thinking,
Right.
lack of faith in the possibility of a better future.
Yeah, it's almost like true peace stems from inner strength, like the conviction that we can build a better world.
Okay, so after all this back and forth, I mean, where do we land on Redbearded FCKR's original question? If someone's incapable of violence, are they truly peaceful or just harmless?
Well, I think it's clear that there's no easy answer.
Right.
I mean, as we've seen, there are so many reasons why someone might be incapable of violence.
Mm-hmm.
Physical limitations, psychological barriers.
Societal constraints.
Right. Even just a deep-seated moral conviction.
And like a lot of commenters pointed out, being harmless doesn't equal being passive or weak.
Exactly.
It can be a very deliberate choice.
Right. It can be a refusal to participate in those cycles of violence.
Think about figures like Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr. I mean, they were physically harmless individuals, but their commitment to nonviolence sparked incredibly powerful movements.
Right. They embodied that idea that true strength lies in resisting the urge to retaliate, in choosing compassion and understanding even when faced with hatred.
And it's not just about individual choices either, right?
Right.
It's about, creating systems and structures that promote justice, equality, respect for everyone, addressing those root causes of violence that we talked about.
Exactly, yeah.
Poverty, inequality, discrimination. It's like those comments about societal constraints and the fear of repercussions, we're getting at.
Right.
If we want to create a more peaceful world, we need to make it possible for people to choose peace without fearing for their safety or well-being.
Absolutely. We need to build a society where everyone feels safe, valued, where they have opportunities, resources, and a way to resolve conflicts peacefully.
So I think a really crucial takeaway from this whole deep dive is that peace is a collective responsibility.
Yeah, it's not something that any one person can achieve on their own.
It requires all of us working together, challenging injustice, promoting understanding, building a world where violence isn't the go-to solution.
Well said. And despite all the complexities, all the challenges that we've discussed, the very fact that people are having these conversations, that they're engaging with these ideas, gives me hope.
Me too. And who knows, maybe this Reddit thread will spark even more conversations about peace, about harmlessness, inspire people to, examine their own beliefs and actions.
Absolutely. It's amazing how these online forums can connect people and foster dialogue.
And hopefully those conversations will translate into real-world change,
Right.
into concrete actions.
Yeah, making the world a little bit more peaceful.
It's a worthy goal and one that we can all contribute to in our own way.
Definitely.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. We hope you found it thought-provoking. And if you're hungry for more insightful conversations like this, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Sean Apollage, and check out our podcast, Voices of the Soul. And hey, if you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone who might appreciate a good philosophical exploration. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep those deep thoughts flowing.